Of all the grapes doing the South African wine story proud around the world, Chenin Blanc has to be top of the list. Whether as a single varietal or the headline act in a white blend, it's winning fans right across the wine-drinking planet. And so today and over the ensuing 9 weeks, I'm going to be hanging out in the winelands, meeting Chenin Blanc producers, chatting to the winemakers about just why we're getting Chenin Blanc so right at the moment, and then meeting some of our top chefs, pairing up food with that Chenin, and really having a pretty indulgent time. And if that's what I'm going to be doing, then this is the perfect place to start. It's the spiritual home of Chenin Blanc in South Africa, Ken Forrester Vineyards, and I'm going to be meeting the godfather himself, Mr. Forrester. So the first thing to establish is that the legendary Ken Forrester does actually exist, and it's not just some mythical marketing character. Give us the snapshot of the journey, how you came to be involved first in wine and then in Chenin Blanc.
How I became involved in wine was a kind of passion from my restaurant days. Our restaurant in Johannesburg had quite a unique situation where I could take you into the wine cellar, and a magic thing happened when customers went into the wine cellar. It's so lucky to see these youngsters really just buying into Chenin Blanc as though it's the most obvious thing. Of course we make Chenin. Why wouldn't you? They faced none of the reservations that I had when we started this 25 years ago. Nobody bats an eye. Chenin Blanc, oh yeah, I'll have that.
All you have to do is drink it to find out why it's such rock star stuff. So let's do exactly that. So this is the Ken Forrester tasting room. We're taking respite from the heat outside and going to work our way through a selection of Chenin Blanc. And yes, you'll see one of the bottles is actually open because where Bruce Willis might be the most dangerous man you can immediately think of, I reckon Ken Forrester armed with a teaspoon would give him a decent run for his money. Because out that teaspoon came a few moments ago, the lid is off and we're ready to jump into some Sparkle Horse. And I think that's a great way to start the discussion around the wine that we're tasting, because we know full well that Cup Classique is champagne style, and you make champagne from Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Meunier, or a combination thereof. So what on earth is Ken Forrester doing making Cup Classique out of Chenin Blanc?
Well, Chenin Blanc, amazingly, is used extensively in France to make sparkling wine. And one doesn't really see it because it's all consumed in France. Most of that sparkling Chenin Blanc is in the local market, local trade. And Chenin Blanc has a wonderful high natural acidity. And natural acid is a precursor to sparkling wine, good sparkling wine. The fruit is picked early. For us, it was really necessity being the mother of invention, in as much as we have a section of the vineyard which, when they planted it, perhaps didn't notice or didn't realize, was planted into a hollow. And so the middle 14, 15 rows of the vineyard were in this hollow, and I didn't realize it was a hollow till about 10 years later, after we'd exhausted every other opportunity at root pruning, at checking the soil and looking to compare what was in the soil versus what was in the leaves, and doing various, whatever we could test. Being a very quick learner, it took me about 10 years to work out that, in fact, what we had was a situation of wet roots, where the spring rains were still trapped in the soil, and the roots in the center of the vineyard simply hadn't dried out yet. So they hadn't begun to function. So that part of the vineyard was always late. And so we decided, as they did in Champagne, if you can't get the fruit to ripen properly, pick it early, re-ferment it, and make a sparkling wine. Now we make this in exactly that method, known universally as a méthode champenoise, but not allowed to define your wine with the champagne word. So we call it Cup Classique. And Cup Classique denotes the fact that you've made the wine in the same fashion as you would make champagne. You fermented wine in a tank to a point of dryness where there's no residual sugar. You've taken that wine, filtered it, cleaned it up, added a brew of sugar and yeast to the wine, calculated to give you the required final alcohol. You then pour it into the tank, and the tank, hey presto, starts re-fermenting, and you bottle it under a crown cork like a beer cap. And bottled under the crown cork, you can then spend a minimum of 18 months on the cork. And you would remove that and also degorge by taking out all the spent yeast cells. And then you put a champagne stopper or a proper sparkling wine stopper into the bottle, tie it down with a little cage, and you have sparkling wine made in the traditional style. You'll see the beauty of sparkling Shenan. And note, it's been poured into a wine glass. I did mention that we make wine before we make champagne, because it was a wine first. And the new trend seems to be serving champagne in a bold glass, as opposed to a very narrow tulip.
So I think there are two views to that. I think if it is just you and me sharing a bottle, then this is brilliant. But if I've got a lot of people and I don't like all of them, then I'll use a flute, because it means I don't have to give them very much.
Cheers, Dan.
Cheers.
Wonderful, wonderful green apples on the nose. It's really appley. All the way down to, when you bite into a green apple, it always leaves a kind of chalkiness on your teeth. You can almost feel that chalkiness from the champagne, from the sparkling wine, from the...
All right, so there's our introduction to the actual drinking of it. And after our walk through 30-odd degrees of midday sunshine, we certainly needed that. I am duly refreshed and thus ready to head on. Before I do that, I see you've used the teaspoon. Professor Forrester of the Global Institute of All Things Wine, does that actually work?
My mother says it does. And I'm not going to question that.
What greater authority could we ask for? All right, well, Mrs. Forrester is a firm believer, so I am too as a result. I'm also a firm believer in the delights of Chenin Blanc, so let's move on to the non-effervescent part of the story. And this is a wine, this Petit Chenin, that I think is such an important part of the Chenin story, because it's an incredibly accessible wine in terms of its price point. I see it in a lot of restaurants where you don't have a high-end celebrity chef. It's the kind of restaurant where you've got a reasonably small menu and they don't have a big wine list, and they know customers are coming for lunch and a salad, and they're probably not going to spend 500 rand on a bottle of wine. So this delivers something that I can buy for lunch on a Wednesday, but at the same time doesn't compromise on giving me that Chenin Blanc experience.
So the Petit Chenin has really become almost our signature tune, if you like. We're well known for this kind of easy, everyday drinking wine. It's a wine which I've personally promoted and told people the reason it's packed in sixes is that you need 3 in the fridge and 3 spare. You know, even I know that adds up to 6. You know, so that's the way we sell it. It's eminently affordable. It's really inexpensive. And we've now at a point where we're making this from about 8 or 9 different vineyards. And it's about putting all of that together to be utterly consistent from year to year, and to produce a wine that continues to please lots of people, because we have so many fans who love this wine, and this is their standby wine. I quite like calling this my 100-point wine. And we, in fact, keep this at home. We share it willingly, happily with guests. My wife loves it. My wife actually does love the Reserve too, but this is stock in trade.
Well, as we can see by the company, your wife generally has excellent taste, and I'm sure this will be no exception. All right, so this is the Petit Chenin, and it's the introduction to the Ken Forrester Chenin Blanc story, and I think it's been the introduction to Chenin Blanc as a whole for many people. We move up the range, though, and the next step is the Ken Forrester Reserve.
Well, Old Vine Reserve really was the first wine. It happened before the Petit, and it was a concerted effort to elevate Chenin Blanc, elevate the image of Chenin Blanc in the minds and the palates of the everyday wine drinker. And I worked in France. I worked at a very wonderful French word which sounds like Chateau de Fel and is spelt Chateau as we know Chateau, and de Fel is D-E-F-E-S-L-E-S.
Ah
Chateau
bon?
de Fel.
Chateau de Fel.
As you would say, it looks like Fezles, but no, don't say that. And Chateau de Fel, Bernard Germaine was the proprietor, a master craftsman in the art of winemaking, and about 30 years ahead of his time. And also slightly disgruntled with the restrictive rules and laws of the French winemaking concern. Not that he wanted to do anything outrageous, but he wanted to put Chenin Blanc on the label in 2 words, Chenin Blanc, which was in Loire Valley was a complete no-no. If you put Chenin Blanc on the label, you had to declassify your wine. It could no longer be wine of origin Sauvignon or Vouvray or whatever. So he was pretty adamant that he was going to get Chenin Blanc on the front label. You can imagine messing with the French establishment.
Was warmly received.
Well, the first thing they would have done was reported the offence to Napoleon, and then worked from there as to how this should be resolved. I mean, there's a wonderful, wonderful patriarchy in the French life, in French custom, in French living. And it's just, you don't change things like that. You don't change things. And he was fermenting Chenin Blanc in 400-litre French oak barrels. And that, for me, was fascinating, because I didn't know anybody else who was doing that. Nobody. So I thought, this is a very good idea. Imported his barrels, brought them back to South Africa, and set about looking at making a Chenin Blanc. Partially barrel fermented in 400-litre barrels. And not to be outdone by the barrel, we hedge our bets and we ferment in stainless steel, a first component of the harvest picked by hand. And then we blend the 2 parts together. So we're looking for fruit on the one hand, fresh fruit, bright acidity, and we're looking for richness, softness on the other hand. And this blend is always somewhere in the region of 50-50. All held together. Listen to the click of quality by this wonderful device called a screw cap, which is just the best way to close wine known to man.
As I'm drinking it, and doing the comparison and thinking about this versus what I've just had, very simply, what distinguishes for you what goes into this versus what goes into your Petit Chenin?
The clue is on the label where we talk of old vines. Here we're looking, in this case, we established a kind of benchmark of 30 years old. We're saying vineyards that are 30 years old are old enough to qualify for this old vines label of ours. And so we've created vineyards that we work with all around Stellenbosch. This is 100% Stellenbosch fruit. And so the vineyards that we work with, we farm the vineyards. Much of this is bush vine. About 80% of this is bush vine. And older vines tend to just have that sensibility and maturity that does so well, that produces a slightly more concentrated fruit. So we get more concentrated grapes, get better concentration in the fruit, nice acidity, perhaps not the same volume, because the volume tapers off slightly, but at the end of the day, it's the quality we're looking for. We're looking for the intensity and the power. And here you have almost, dare I say, an oily sensation in the nicest way, where the wine, just in terms of its texture, is quite rounded. And that's partially the barrel fermentation and what the barrel has done to the wine, and the fact that you've got this concentrated fruit. And so you end up with that lovely round, mouth-filling texture.
Sort of that sheen on your palate as it makes its way through.
If you could polish a wine, yes, the wine seems to be slightly polished, yes.
Yeah, like if oil slicks were good things, then this is what that would be.
You know, remarkably, Chenin Blanc has many, many similarities to Riesling in many ways. Old Chenin Blanc, which we'll talk about, develops a slightly terpene nose, which you pick up in Riesling. Riesling makes the most wonderful sparkling wine, which Chenin Blanc does. Riesling produces the most delicious sweet wines, which Chenin Blanc does. Riesling is slightly aromatic, slightly oily on the palate, which Chenin Blanc does. And if you go through their lineage and you go and have a look at the family tree of Chenin Blanc and Riesling, they both share a distant cousin called Sauvignon. And I would think that that Sauvignon is the responsible kind of gene that brings these two grapes to their similarity.
This might be me reading too much into it, but I'm starting to think you quite like Chenin Blanc.
The most fascinating white wine grape on planet Earth.
Now, what you've just given me is some old vine, but it's not the oldest wine, and you've got an older version, and I'm fascinated to see how they compare something that is already an old vine that's now got even older through the bottle aging process, and what that's doing to the wine we're drinking.
So the important thing to kind of register, obviously, the winemaker in 12 years has got a lot cleverer, much smarter, but not really. We're doing the same things we've always done. We're fermenting in tank and we're fermenting in barrel. The barrels come from the same cooper. The oak is from the same forest. It's aged for 3 years before it's coopered into barrels. And here we have a 2007 Chenin Blanc Old Vine Reserve. And look at that golden hue. And what I truly love about the fact in this golden hue is that whilst it's golden, undoubtedly golden, it has green lights in the wine. Those green lights in the wine tell me she's not done yet. This wine has another 5 years ahead of it. And it's 2007. It's a mere 14 years old. And it was a Old Vine Reserve Chenin Blanc, which really was not an expensive wine.
14 years old. I can think back. I think I was still at school 14 years ago. You were early on in your wine journey. But it allows us to run through the memories and to think that this wine has been quietly, patiently sitting to introduce itself to us today.
You know, people, where were you in 2007 when we had our first child? Or, you know, people have memories going back and linked to it. Here you have really what is quite an everyday wine. Just simply this we tucked away. I liked it. I mean, we had a deal with the bank in those days, sell the wine and put the money back. However, I pinched a whole pallet of this and stuck it in the back of the storeroom, and this has been safely tucked away in the warehouse. And so you're sitting with a 14-year-old that we sell right here out of the tasting room for not a lot. And it's just, I think, to be able to drink a wine, a white wine of this age, that golden hue. I mean, there is kind of marmalade, that kind of woolen blanket where you kind of snuggle in the winter. You smell the blanket as you kind of snuggle into it. And honey, beeswax, and honey.
And still a beautiful softness to it. There's nothing abrasive about this. It's settled comfortably like an old pair of shoes, and it's just... Let's go through the FMC. This wine is an extraordinary success story, because if I think of everything you've done as a Ken Forrester brand in élevaging, to use my French term, the image of Chenin Blanc, it's this. And I think those naysayers who told you you're absolutely daft to be making Chenin Blanc would have thought, well, you're completely lost it if you told them you're going to be making this kind of premier product and trying to sell it at the price that you do. Is this the wine that gives you the most satisfaction in terms of the Ken Forrester Chenin Blanc success story?
This is crazy, off the charts. I mean, if my wife ever accused me of a mistress, this would be it. This is the one that drives me crazy. This is really, each vintage is a compound harvesting technique where we would harvest as many as 10 or 11 times, selecting through the vineyard. And it all 100% goes into barrels, 45, 50% new oak. So we really are fiddling around with a lot of new oak against my better judgment. And then we need to ensure that the parcels are correctly balanced. We have some new oak and some older barrels in the parcels. And then the final assemblage of this wine, putting together 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 batches of 4 barrels, 3 barrels, 7 barrels, 2 barrels, made on one day. That final selection is like a giant game of Jenga, where As you add one more, it tends to want to fall over, and you've got to go back. And you've got to pull one out from here. And that's what putting this wine together is like. It's really that big. And under a screw cap, simply because it's a reliable closure. Why would you store your best wine under an unreliable closure? We really want a reliable closure. So here we are, screw cap, once again, that undeniable kick of quality as you crack the seal. And FMC, 2019, our 20th vintage.
Well, cheers to 20 years of Chenin Blanc, Ken Forrester.
Dan, what can I tell you?
This is the crowning glory of the Ken Forrester empire, and there's a good reason why this is such a key part of our Chenin Blanc story around the world. And it is almost the end of our Chenin Blanc story in terms of the cellar, but there's one more. You've been banging on about screw caps for the last 3 hours. Finally, even you have had to give us a cork.
The truth shall be revealed all in good time. That what we have here in the top of this bottle closely resembles, mimics, looks like, feels like, tastes like cork. And yet it is in fact made from cork, but from cork particles which have been suitably nuked and neutralized so that your cork is not a natural piece of bark punched out of a tree, but rather an agglomerate of millions of tiny bits of sterile cork which are guaranteed not to contain any of the nasties. So what you have is a technical closure which looks like cork and satisfies the romantics who want a cork in their wine. But this is very much a technical closure. Sweet wines are built not on sugar, but on acid. The acid is the frame. Imagine the spine. Without a spine, you couldn't hook the shoulders on, you couldn't hook the hips on. We'd be a blob. All of us would just be these blobs. So, I mean, the spine is the acidity, and acid runs through this wine because that's part of the concentration of what the botrytis does, is it concentrates the acidity left in the grape. And that acidity is what you build sweet wines on.
Hey, you give me a tough choice because from here my journey is just down the road to 96 Winery Road, a restaurant I've had many great meals at, and you've had even more as the evidence shows. And I'm going to head over with you to meet the chef and to find some food that pairs with some Shenan. And you very kindly asked me to choose one of these. I love all of them. I love the fact that you've had some fun with Cup Classique and turned Shenan into a really beautiful bottle of bubbles. The Petty's got such a cool story, and the old vine speaks to such an important part of our wine heritage. And I do love a sweet wine, but I'm afraid I'm going full school, splash out the Black Amex, and I'm going with the FMC. I've loved it for many years, and what I really love about it is what it offers a chef in terms of the food they can play around with and the response they can have to that wine. So if it's okay with you, Ken, we'll bottle up the FMC, we'll head off to 96 Winery Road, and we'll go and see what the chef
The lucky part is we can take that with us. Perfect, no trouble at all.
So there we go, a world-class tasting of some extraordinary Chenin Blanc, and the Chenin Blanc story continues shortly at 96 Winery Road. So this is a restaurant I haven't been to for some time. It's 96 Winery Road in the heart of the winelands. I've only got good memories, and I now get to extend them because not only am I drinking some more of the fabulous Ken Forrester FMC Shenan, but I'm getting to meet the chef. So Adrian Buchanan is the man at the helm now of 96 Winery Road. Adrian, thank you for having us. I've got some lovely memories of eating here over the years. Tell us a little bit about this restaurant.
It's called 96 Winery, mainly because of the year that it was opened. A lot of people actually mistake it for the address, but it's not.
I'd like to know, provided you're up for the task, can you make me a dish that you feel really epitomizes the food that should go with an FMC Chenin Blanc?
We're going to do a slow roasted pork belly. It's crackling.
Ooh.
Korean barbecue sauce, glass noodles for the neutrality, just to pick up all of the flavors.
Oof, I think I might be falling in love with you, Adrian Buchanan.
There we
That
go.
sounds amazing. All right, so we've got the FMC, we've talked it through with Ken, we know why it's such a good wine. How's it going to go with the food? We're going to send Adrian off to the kitchen, and once he's done, he's going to give Ken and I the perfect dish for the FMC. So from the journey of the vineyards of Ken Forrester through to sitting beside a plate here at 96 Winery Road, it's a perfect example of food and wine coming together. It's also a great illustration of both the delight and the dexterity of Chenin Blanc, and it's an adventure that's only just begun. Join me again next week as I head out into the vineyards, meet another winemaker, discuss that love of Chenin Blanc, and find another chef to produce something quite brilliant. Cheers.